What if the universe is not silent at all, but we've simply forgotten how to listen? There exists a profound symphony playing at this very moment, not in some distant realm, but right here, weaving through your ordinary existence. Most of humanity walks through life wearing invisible earmuffs, deaf to the extraordinary concert that surrounds them. The truly awakened person isn't someone with special powers. They're simply someone who has remembered how to take these earmuffs off. The most delicious secret about spiritual awakening is that it doesn't give you anything new. It reveals what was always playing beneath the surface of your awareness. Like a man who suddenly realizes he's been standing in an ocean while desperately searching for water. The 5 sounds I'm about to share with you aren't hidden behind some mystical veil. They're playing so loudly, so constantly, that you've learned to tune them out completely. Your entire life has been spent learning which channels of reality deserve your attention and which should be ignored. But what if everything meaningful, everything sacred, everything that would finally make you feel truly alive, has been hiding in those ignored channels all along? Do you know, there's actually no such thing as silence. It's a complete illusion, a fantasy we've constructed. Even John Cage discovered this when he entered an anechoic chamber, a room designed to be absolutely silent, and reported hearing 2 sounds, one high, his nervous system, and one low, his blood circulating. Isn't that fascinating? Even in what we consider perfect silence, the body itself is quite a noisy affair. But here's where it gets interesting. The average person today lives in a world more saturated with noise than at any other time in human history. Traffic, machinery, notifications, conversations, background music, yet simultaneously they experience a kind of inner deafness that would astonish our ancestors. We've become so accustomed to filtering out sounds that we've extended this filtering to dimensions of reality that we desperately need to hear. You see, a curious thing happens when you place a frog in hot water. It jumps out immediately. But if you place it in cool water and gradually heat it, the frog adjusts until it's too late. This is precisely what's happened to our listening. We've gradually turned down the volume on the most profound aspects of existence until we can no longer hear them at all. And what is this deafness, really? It's not physical at all, it's attentional. We've been taught what deserves our attention and what doesn't. Pay attention to your teacher, not to the birds outside the window. Focus on the important things, your career, your goals, not on the sound of rain on satin, leaves. And so, year by year, our attention narrows until we're listening to an incredibly thin slice of reality. But here's the cosmic joke. What if that thin slice isn't the important part at all? What if, like a radio tuned to only one station, we've been missing the full spectrum of broadcasts that make life meaningful? The spiritual traditions I've studied all point to a remarkable truth. Awakening begins with a kind of listening that most people have forgotten is even possible. Let me ask you something rather impertinent. When was the last time you listened, truly listened, without waiting for the sound to end so you could get on with your thinking? When did you last give yourself completely to the act of hearing what is, rather than immediately labeling, judging, and filing it away? I suspect for most people the answer is rarely, if ever. And this is our starting point. Before we can hear the 5 sounds that awakened consciousness detects, we must first recognize how utterly asleep our ears have become. We must confront the uncomfortable truth that we've been trained to be selectively deaf to aspects of reality that might just be the most important ones. Awakening to these sounds doesn't require special training or decades of meditation, though those things certainly don't hurt. No, it begins with a simple yet revolutionary act, suspending your certainty about what is worth hearing and what isn't. It begins by entertaining the outrageous possibility that what you've been tuning out might contain the very secrets to the universe you've been searching for all along. Now here's a delicious paradox for you to consider. The most profound sounds, the ones that truly matter, aren't exactly sounds at all, at least not in the way we typically think of sounds. They exist in a curious borderland between physical vibration and something else entirely. Something we might call meaning, or perhaps awareness itself. You see, when the Zen masters speak of the sound of one hand clapping, they're not being deliberately obscure or mystical just to annoy you. They're pointing to something that exists beyond our conventional categories, something that challenges the very division between subject and object, between the hearer and what is heard. Consider music for a moment. Is music merely the vibration of air molecules? Of course not. The same pattern of air molecules might be profound music to one person and meaningless noise to another. The music doesn't exist in the air molecules at all. It exists in the relationship between those vibrations and a consciousness capable of receiving them. And this is our first clue about why these 5 sounds are only accessible to awakened consciousness. It's not that others can't physically detect them. It's that they haven't yet developed the particular quality of attention that transforms these vibrations into meaning. It's like having a radio that receives only AM when the most extraordinary broadcasts are on FM. The limitation isn't in the sounds, it's in the receiver. Let me put it another way. If I play a recording of bark to a dog, the dog hears something but not bark. The dog lacks the conceptual framework, the cultural context, and the particular kind of attention needed to hear Bach in those sound waves. Similarly, these 5 sounds I'm about to describe require a certain quality of consciousness to be truly heard. Think of a wine connoisseur and someone who's never tasted wine before. They both put the exact same liquid in their mouths, but they taste entirely different things. One tastes hints of oak with a blackberry finish, while the other just tastes wine. The difference isn't in the wine, it's in the tasting. So before we go further, I want you to recognize something crucial. The sounds I'm describing aren't exotic or supernatural. They're not auditory hallucinations or mystical experiences reserved for saints. They're aspects of reality that are available to any consciousness that has developed the capacity to receive them. The paradox here is exquisite. These sounds are both utterly ordinary and completely extraordinary. They're playing all the time, yet most people go their entire lives without hearing them even once. Not because they lack ears, but because they lack a certain quality of listening. And what is this quality? I call it listening without resistance. It's a form of attention that doesn't immediately categorize, judge, or explain away what it encounters. It's a listening that is willing to be changed by what it hears, rather than changing what it hears to fit what it already believes. This kind of listening is rare in our world because it requires vulnerability. It means temporarily suspending the very thing most of us cling to most desperately, our certainty about what is real and what isn't. But it is precisely in this suspension of certainty that the most profound sounds become audible. The first sound that awakened consciousness can hear, and this will strike you as rather peculiar, is the sound of your own thinking without words. Now, you might object immediately, but thoughts are made of words. Are they really? I invite you to question this assumption that seems so obviously true. Consider this. Have you ever had the experience of knowing exactly what you want to say, but struggling to find the right words? Of course you have. But if thoughts are made of words, how could you possibly know what you want to say before finding the words? Something rather mysterious is happening here, isn't it? You see, what most people call thinking is really just internal talking, an endless stream of words flowing through the mind. But beneath this verbal chatter is another layer of consciousness altogether, a form of knowing that precedes language and doesn't depend on it. And this pre-verbal knowing actually has a sound, not a sound made of air vibrations, but a kind of psychic vibration that the awakened mind can detect. The Zen masters have a marvelous phrase for this: the sound of your original face. Your original face is who you were before you learned language, before you were given a name, before you were told what the world is and how it works. And this original face has a voice, but it doesn't speak in English or Japanese or any other human language. When you begin to hear this sound, the sound of knowing without words, something quite extraordinary happens. You suddenly realize that you've been confusing the map for the territory all along. Words are merely symbols, pointers, maps. They are never the thing itself. And you've been living in the map instead of the territory. Here's a simple experiment. Try to define love without using any other words. You can't do it, can you? And yet you know exactly what love is when you experience it. This knowing beyond words is your birthright, but we've been taught to distrust it, to believe that if we can't articulate something in language, it isn't real or doesn't matter. The first sound of awakened consciousness is the rediscovery of this non-verbal knowing, this direct perception that precedes language. And when you begin to hear it, you'll be astonished at how noisy it's been all along, how it's been sending you messages and insights that your verbal mind has been drowning out with its incessant chatter. Some traditions call this intuition, but that word doesn't quite capture it. It's more like remembering how to hear the foundation of your own consciousness, the ground from which all your verbal thoughts spring forth. And once you can hear it, you realize that you've never needed words to know the most important things. Words are splendid tools. Of course I'm using them right now. But they're terrible masters. When we mistake the verbal description for the reality, we become like the man who, when shown the moon, stares at the pointing finger instead. The first sound of awakened consciousness is the sound of reality, before you slice it up with names and categories, and it's been playing your entire life. To hear this sound, try this. The next time you're absolutely certain you know something, pause and ask yourself, how do I know this? Keep tracing your knowing backward until you reach the point where words fail. That borderland, where knowing exists but words don't, that's where the first sound plays. And it's been accompanying you from your first breath to your last. The second sound that awakened consciousness can hear is even more subtle than the first. It's the sound of the space between your heartbeats. Not the lub-dub of the heart itself, which anyone with a stethoscope can hear, but the space between these sounds, the pocket of silence that exists between each beat and the next. Now, you might think there's nothing to hear in this space. That's the whole point of a space, isn't it? But this is precisely where we've been tricked by our conventional understanding of sound and silence. Because in this space between heartbeats lies one of the most profound truths of your existence. You see, your entire life exists in the precarious gap between one heartbeat and the next. Each beat is in its own way a tiny birth, and each space between is a tiny death. And yet we go through our days completely unaware of this perpetual rhythm of existence and non-existence that our very lives depend on. When you begin to hear the space between heartbeats, you confront a truth that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Your existence is not guaranteed. There is no cosmic promise that after this heartbeat there will be another. The next beat is always a gift, never a guarantee. And strangely, when you truly hear this sound, or perhaps I should say this silence, an extraordinary thing happens. Instead of being terrified by the precariousness of life, you begin to appreciate each moment with an intensity that was impossible before. The ordinary becomes sacred simply because it exists at all. The Japanese have a concept called ma, the space between things, the emptiness that gives form meaning. Without spaces between words, language would be incomprehensible. Without pauses in music, we would hear only noise. And without the space between heartbeats, the heart itself could not function. This space between heartbeats carries another message too. The reminder that life is not continuous but discrete, a series of moments rather than an unbroken line. We tend to think of time as a river flowing smoothly, but what if it's actually more like a string of beads, each moment complete in itself? When I lived in Japan, I was fascinated by how Zen gardens used empty space as an essential element of design. The rocks and plants were carefully arranged not just for what they were, but for the spaces they created between them. These gardens weren't meant just to be seen, but to be heard in a certain way, to let the silence speak. Similarly, when you learn to hear the space between your heartbeats, you're hearing the very structure of life itself, the rhythmic alternation of being and non-being that makes existence possible. And this hearing transforms ordinary consciousness into something far more expansive and profound. Try this sometime. Place your hand over your heart and feel its beating. But instead of focusing on the beats themselves, bring your attention to the tiny moments of stillness between them. Don't try to hear anything, just be present with this space. At first, you might think there's nothing there at all. But if you listen without expectation, Eventually you'll begin to sense something extraordinary in this emptiness, the very ground of being from which each moment of your life springs forth. And once you've heard this sound, you'll never again take for granted the miracle that is your next breath, your next thought, your next heartbeat. You'll have discovered one of the most closely guarded secrets of existence, that life is not a possession but a perpetual gift, renewed in every moment, over and over again. The third sound that awakened consciousness can hear is perhaps the most ancient of all the subtle, underlying rhythms of the natural world that most modern humans have forgotten how to detect. And I don't mean simply the obvious sounds of birdsong or wind in the trees, lovely though these may be. I'm talking about something far more fundamental and mysterious. You see, nature doesn't operate according to the mechanical tick-tock of our clocks and calendars. It moves in cycles within cycles, rhythms within rhythms, some so vast they take millennia to complete, others so quick they transpire in microseconds. And all of these rhythms are communicating something essential, if only we could remember how to listen. Our ancestors understood this, intuitively. They could hear the change of seasons approaching before any visible signs appeared. They could sense impending weather shifts in their bones. They could feel the subtle alterations in plant and animal behavior that signaled important changes in the environment. Not because they had supernatural powers, but because they had never learned to tune these sounds out. Modern humans, by contrast, have become profoundly disconnected from these natural rhythms. We check weather apps instead of reading the sky. We follow clocks instead of the sun. We eat according to schedules rather than hunger. And in doing so, we've muted one of the most important channels of information available to us, the direct communication between our bodies and the living systems that sustain them. When you begin to hear this third sound, the hidden rhythms of nature, something remarkable happens. You start to recognize that you are not separate from these rhythms at all. Your body follows the same patterns as the tides, the seasons, the migrations of birds, and the cycles of plants. You are not an isolated entity observing nature from the outside. You are a direct expression of these very same patterns. I recall walking in a forest once during my time in California and suddenly becoming aware of what felt like a vast, slow pulse moving through everything around me, the trees, the soil, the insects, and myself. It wasn't something I could hear with my ears exactly, but it was unmistakably there, a kind of baseline rhythm underlying the entire ecosystem. And in that moment, I understood that this rhythm had always been there, playing through my own body as well, but I had been too distracted to notice it. This is what the Taoist sages meant when they spoke of being in harmony with the Tao, not forcing yourself to follow some external rule, but simply recognizing and flowing with the rhythms that are already moving through you and everything else. The awakened person doesn't create this harmony, they simply stop interfering with it. Here's a curious thing to try. The next time you're in a natural setting, a park, a garden, a forest, close your eyes and focus not on any particular sound, but on the pattern of all sounds together. Listen for the way they form a kind of music, a composition that no human could have orchestrated. Then, without opening your eyes, try to feel how your own breath and heartbeat participate in this larger symphony. What you'll begin to sense, if you stay with this practice long enough, is that nature isn't just making random noise. It's speaking a language, one that your body understands perfectly well, even if your thinking mind has forgotten how to translate it. And once you start to hear this language again, you'll find yourself spontaneously moving in greater harmony with the world around you. The third sound of awakened consciousness is this: the recognition that you are not an accidental tourist in the natural world, but an integral participant in its ongoing conversation. And when you truly hear this sound, the artificial boundary between you and nature begins to dissolve, revealing a far more wondrous and interconnected reality than most people ever suspect exists. The fourth sound that awakened consciousness can hear is perhaps the most transformative for our relationships. It's what I call the echo of others' being. This is the subtle reverberation that occurs when you truly encounter another person, not as an object or a means to an end, but as a unique expression of consciousness, just as real as your own. Most of us go through life not really hearing the people around us at all. We hear their words, certainly, but we filter these. Words through our own preconceptions, expectations, and desires. We're constantly translating what others say into terms that fit our existing worldview. What does this mean for me? How does this confirm what I already believe? What should I say next? But there's another way of listening that becomes available when consciousness awakens to its true nature. It's a form of reception that doesn't immediately convert the other person's expression into your own terms. Instead, it allows their unique being to resonate within the space of your awareness, creating an echo that reveals something extraordinary. They are another center of the universe, exactly as you are. This sound, this echo of another's being, carries a profound truth that most of us intuitively resist. It tells us that we are not, in fact, the central character in the cosmic drama. Every conscious being is equally I from its own perspective. Every person you pass on the street is having an experience just as vivid, complex, and meaningful as your own. The Hindus express this beautifully with the greeting Namaste. The divine in me recognizes and honors the divine in you. But it's one thing to say these words and quite another to actually hear the sound they point to. When you truly hear the echo of another's being, it becomes impossible to treat them as a mere supporting character in your story. I remember a conversation I once had with a taxi driver in London, a brief exchange that I initially thought nothing of. But then, for just a moment, I actually heard him, not his words, but the unique quality of consciousness that was expressing itself through those words. And suddenly this taxi driver, this role I had assigned him in my mental drama, dissolved completely. In his place was something miraculous, another I, another center of company. The universe, as vast and mysterious as my own. When you begin to hear this sound, this echo of others' being, relationships transform from transactions into encounters between mysteries. You stop trying to fit people into the boxes your mind has created for them. You stop assuming you know what they're going to say before they say it. You stop unconsciously ranking people as more or less important based on how useful they are to you. Instead, you enter what Martin Buber called the I-thou relationship, where the other person is not an it to be understood and used, but a thou to be encountered in all their unfathomable uniqueness. And in this encounter, something happens that cannot be explained or predicted, a kind of mutual revelation that changes both parties. Try this sometime. The next time you're speaking with someone, anyone at all, even a store clerk or a stranger on the bus, try to momentarily suspend everything you think you know about them. Don't try to figure them out or categorize them. Don't even focus on the content of what they're saying. Instead, listen for the quality of consciousness that is expressing itself through them, the particular tone of their being. What you'll begin to hear, if you practice this kind of listening, is that each person has a unique sound, not audible to the physical ear, but unmistakable to awakened awareness. And this sound tells you something that words never could, that the person before you is not merely similar to you or connected to you, but in some mysterious way, is you, another way that the cosmos is experiencing itself. The fourth sound of awakened consciousness reveals the profound truth behind every authentic spiritual teaching, that separation is an illusion, and that beneath our apparent differences lies a unity so fundamental that once you've heard it, you can never again believe yourself to be truly alone in the universe. The fifth and final sound that awakened consciousness can hear is what I playfully call the cosmic hum of existence, though words really do fail rather spectacularly when trying to describe it. This is not a sound in any ordinary sense, yet once you've heard it, you realize it's been playing all along, the fundamental vibration from which all other sounds, and indeed all phenomena whatsoever, arise. Various traditions have given this sound different names. In Hinduism, it's called Aum or Aum, the primordial vibration from which the universe manifests. The Sufis speak of it as the music of the spheres. Pythagoreans considered it the harmonious resonance created by the movement of celestial bodies. Quantum physicists might describe it as the underlying vibrational nature of all energy and matter. But all these descriptions miss something essential. This is not a sound that exists out there in the universe. It's not something separate from you that you're hearing. Rather, it's the sound of existence itself, including your own existence happening. It's what being sounds like when you stop dividing reality into me in here and world out there. Now, I realize this sounds terribly abstract and mystical, but I assure you, there's nothing supernatural about it at all. It's actually the most natural thing in the world, so natural that we've trained ourselves to tune it out completely, much as you might not notice the sound of air conditioning until someone points it out to you. The reason most people don't hear this cosmic hum is simple. Our attention is designed to focus on differences, not on the underlying unity from which differences arise. We notice the figure, not the ground, the wave, not the ocean, the specific objects of consciousness, not consciousness itself. It's a perfectly useful adaptation for survival, but it leaves us deaf to the most profound dimension of our existence. I recall a marvelous experience I had during a retreat at a Zen monastery in Japan. After several days of meditation, I was walking in the monastery garden when suddenly, for no apparent reason, the cosmic hum became audible to me. It wasn't that anything in the external world had changed, the birds were still singing, the wind was still rustling the leaves, but my way of hearing had shifted dramatically. Instead of hearing separate sounds, I was hearing the singular process of existence expressing itself through infinite variations. The distinction between sounds and silence, between out there and in here, between me and not me, had temporarily dissolved. What remained was simply the hum of being itself, playing through everything, including what I had been calling myself. What makes this fifth sound so revolutionary when you finally hear it is that it completely undermines our usual sense of being a separate self, isolated inside a body, peering out at a foreign world. Because this sound doesn't come from anywhere, it's not out there or in here. It's the sound of the artificial boundary between out there and in here, dissolving. Many people have brief, spontaneous experiences of hearing this cosmic hum during moments of extraordinary beauty or love, or sometimes during near-death experiences. In these moments, the separate self temporarily relaxes its defensive posture and allows itself to disappear into the larger harmony of existence. But typically, the ego quickly reasserts control, explaining away the experience as a mere anomaly or emotional reaction. The awakened person is simply someone who has learned to hear this fifth sound not as an occasional accident, but as the ever-present background of all experience. Not because they're special or gifted, but because they've stopped filtering it out. They've recognized that what they are is not separate from this cosmic vibration, but is in fact nothing other than this vibration temporarily taking the form of a human being. How does one begin to hear this sound? Not by straining to listen for something exotic, but by relaxing the habit of selective attention. Instead of focusing on particular objects of consciousness, allow your awareness to rest in consciousness itself. Instead of following the contents of thoughts, notice the space in which thoughts appear. Like a cinema goer who stops watching just the movie and becomes aware of the screen on which all movies play, you begin to notice the field of awareness that contains all experience. And as you rest in this awareness, without grasping at particular experiences or pushing others away, something extraordinary happens. The cosmic hum that has always been playing begins to make itself known. Not as something new or foreign, but as the most familiar thing imaginable, the very sound of your own being, which was never separate from the being of everything else. This fifth sound reveals the truth that the mystics of all traditions have pointed to. Your true nature was never contained within the boundaries of your skin, never limited to the particular bundle of experiences you call me. You are the whole concert, not just one instrument in the orchestra. And once you hear this truth, you can never again believe in your absolute separation from the rest of existence. Having described these 5 sounds of awakened consciousness, I must now offer an important caution. The moment you begin seeking these sounds as special experiences to attain, you've already missed the point entirely and fallen into a rather pernicious trap. And this trap has ensnared countless spiritual seekers throughout the ages. You see, there's a delightful irony in spiritual awakening that never ceases to amuse me. The very act of striving to become awakened is precisely what prevents awakening. It's like trying to relax through tremendous effort, or trying to fall asleep by concentrating really hard. The very mechanism you're using is exactly what's in the way. And so it is with these 5 sounds. If you set off on a quest to hear these special, exotic sounds that only spiritually advanced people can detect, you're reinforcing the very illusion that keeps you from hearing them naturally. You're strengthening the sense of being a separate self who lacks something and needs to attain it through effort. The cosmic joke is this: these sounds are completely ordinary and available to everyone at all times. They're not achievements or acquisitions. They're not signs of spiritual advancement. They're simply what reality sounds like when you stop imposing your preconceptions, expectations, and self-centered filters on it. I've seen this pattern play out countless times in spiritual communities. Someone has a profound experience, perhaps they momentarily hear the cosmic hum I described earlier, and immediately the ego co-opts this experience as a personal achievement. I heard it, I'm getting somewhere, I'm spiritually advanced. And in that very moment, the genuine insight is replaced by another form of spiritual materialism, collecting special experiences like trophies. Let me be crystal clear about this. Awakening is not about having special or exotic experiences that others don't have. It's about experiencing the ordinary in an entirely different way. It's not about hearing supernatural sounds. It's about hearing the actual sounds of existence without your usual filters and distortions. The Buddha expressed this perfectly when he said that before his enlightenment, mountains were mountains and rivers were rivers. During his spiritual striving, mountains were no longer mountains and rivers were no longer rivers. But after enlightenment, mountains were once again mountains and rivers once again rivers. The difference was not in what he perceived, but in how he perceived it. This points to another trap that spiritual seekers often fall into: the belief that awakening will result in constant, extraordinary experiences of bliss, insight, or cosmic consciousness. This is a profound misunderstanding. The awakened life includes the full spectrum of human experience: joy and sorrow, pleasure and pain, clarity and confusion. The difference lies not in which experiences you have, but in your relationship to all experience. I recall a Zen story about a student who approached his master and excitedly reported having experienced a profound state of cosmic consciousness during meditation. "It will pass," replied the master dismissively. A few weeks later, the crestfallen student returned, reporting that indeed the experience had faded. "That too will pass," said the master with the same equanimity. The lesson is clear. Awakening is not found in any particular experience, no matter how profound, but in the freedom from being attached to or identified with any experience whatsoever. And here's where it gets really interesting. The 5 sounds I've described are not actually 5 different sounds at all. They're 5 different ways of noticing the same fundamental reality: that existence is an undivided, seamless whole, and that the separate self is a convenient fiction rather than an absolute truth. Each sound is simply another doorway into this recognition. So rather than setting off on a quest to collect these 5 sounds like spiritual merit badges, I invite you to consider a different approach entirely. Instead of seeking special experiences, try bringing a quality of open, curious attention to the most ordinary moments of your life. What does drinking a cup of tea sound like when you're fully present with it? What does a conversation with a friend sound like when you're not filtering their words through your preconceptions? The great secret of awakening is that it's available right here, right now, in this very ordinary moment. Not because this moment is special, but because reality is always only ever expressing itself as this moment. The 5 sounds of awakened consciousness are not hidden behind a veil of ignorance that requires spiritual attainment to penetrate. They're playing right now, perfectly audible to anyone who has simply stopped listening for something else. Let's explore now how this quality of listening becomes not just a symptom of awakening, but a direct path to it. Because there's something quite extraordinary about the act of true listening that most spiritual seekers completely overlook in their quest for transformation. You see, most approaches to spiritual awakening involve some form of doing: meditating, chanting, studying, performing rituals, following moral precepts, and so forth. And while these practices certainly have their place, they often inadvertently reinforce the very sense of separate selfhood they aim to dissolve. They become something that I am doing in order to attain something that I currently lack. But listening, real listening, works in precisely the opposite direction. Instead of being an act of doing, it's an act of receptivity. Instead of reinforcing the separate self, it temporarily suspends it. And this makes listening one of the most direct and unfailing gateways to awakened consciousness available to us. Consider what happens when you truly listen, without agenda, without filtering, without waiting for your turn to speak. There's a kind of self-forgetting that occurs naturally. The boundaries between listener and what is heard become permeable. You're not so much hearing something as becoming the act of hearing itself. This is why music can be such a powerful spiritual experience for many people. When we're completely absorbed in music we love, we momentarily stop being a separate self who is listening to the music out there and instead become the experience of the music itself. The division between subject and object temporarily dissolves, and we taste a kind of unity that no amount of intellectual understanding can provide. The same principle applies to all forms of listening, not just to music. When you give yourself completely to the act of hearing, whether it's the sound of rain, the voice of a loved one, or even the cacophony of a busy street, something shifts in consciousness. The usual sense of being a separate self, peering out at a world of objects, is replaced by a more unified field of experiencing in which you and what you're hearing are not two separate things. This shift is subtle but profound, and it points to something that the great spiritual traditions have been teaching for millennia. The separate self is not an absolute reality, but a relative construct, a useful fiction that can be temporarily suspended. And in that suspension lies a freedom and peace that no achievement of the separate self could ever provide. I recall an experience I had while giving a lecture once. I was discussing some rather complex aspects of Zen philosophy, and suddenly I realized that I wasn't the one speaking at all. The words were simply arising in response to the situation, without any sense of a me orchestrating them. I was listening to my lecture with the same curiosity and surprise as everyone else in the room. And in that moment, there was an extraordinary freedom, the freedom from being a someone who has to figure everything out and make it all work. This points to a revolutionary insight. You are not the thinker of your thoughts or the hearer of sounds. Rather, thoughts and sounds are arising in the field of awareness that you fundamentally are. Just as waves are not separate from the ocean but temporary expressions of it, all experiences, including the experience of being a separate self, are temporary expressions of consciousness itself. When you truly listen, you naturally shift from identifying with a particular pattern of consciousness, the separate self, to resting as the field of consciousness in which all patterns, including the separate self, arise and dissolve. And this shift is the essence of spiritual awakening, regardless of the tradition or terminology used to describe it. So how does one cultivate this art of receptivity? Not by adding more techniques or knowledge to the separate self's repertoire, but by recognizing and relaxing the habits that maintain the illusion of separation. And one of the most powerful ways to do this is through what we might call global listening. In global listening, you're not focusing on any particular sound or trying to filter out others. You're not labeling sounds as pleasant or unpleasant, important or unimportant. You're not even distinguishing between external sounds and internal thoughts. Instead, you're allowing all phenomena, all experiences, to arise and dissolve in the field of awareness without interference. Try this simple experiment. For just 1 minute, allow your attention to rest in an open, receptive awareness of whatever is arising in your experience. Sounds, sensations, thoughts, feelings, without following any of it, without rejecting any of it, without trying to change any of it. Simply notice it all appearing and dissolving in the space of awareness, like clouds passing through the sky. What you may discover in this practice is that awareness itself is already awake, already at peace, already free. It's not something you need to create or attain, it's what you fundamentally are beneath all the patterns of thinking, feeling, and perceiving that you've learned to call me. And the 5 sounds of awakened consciousness are simply different aspects of this fundamental reality making itself known through the act of true listening. The art of receptivity, then, is not a means to an end, but a direct expression of your true nature. It's not something the separate self does in order to become awakened. It's the natural activity of awareness when the illusion of separation is momentarily suspended. And in that suspension, the 5 sounds we've been exploring become not just audible but unavoidable, for they are, in fact, the song of your own true nature, which has been playing all along. We arrive now at what might seem a contradiction. The culmination of hearing is a state beyond hearing altogether. But like all apparent paradoxes in spiritual teachings, this one contains a profound truth that can only be approached through a kind of deliberate confusion of our usual categories of understanding. You see, all the sounds we've been exploring, from the sound of thought without words to the cosmic hum of existence, are still, in a sense, part of the dualistic framework of experience. There is still something being heard by someone, even if that something is extraordinarily subtle and that someone is increasingly transparent. But the ultimate revelation awaiting the awakened consciousness is the complete dissolution of this duality, the recognition that the hearer and the heard were never two things to begin with. This is extraordinarily difficult to talk about, because our very language is structured around the subject-object division. We say, "I hear a sound," which immediately creates the impression of an I separate from the sound. But what if there is no separation between the sound and the hearing of it? What if both the sound and the one who hears it are temporary patterns in a unified field of consciousness? This is not a mere philosophical speculation, but a direct reality that can be recognized when the usual structures of self-centered perception momentarily relax. And when this recognition occurs, something extraordinary happens. The world is no longer experienced as a collection of separate objects and events, happening to a separate you, but as a seamless totality that includes what you previously called yourself as one of its expressions. I'm reminded of a beautiful Zen story about the master Kyogen, who had studied for years without attaining awakening. In frustration, he burned all his books and became a simple groundskeeper. One day, while sweeping, his broom sent a small pebble flying against a bamboo stalk. Upon hearing the small tock sound, Kyogen suddenly awakened. He wasn't hearing the sound, he was the sound. The bamboo, the pebble, the hearing, and the hearer were revealed as an undivided whole. This is the state beyond hearing that all genuine spiritual paths point toward, not a special experience available only to the spiritually elite, but the fundamental nature of reality that's hiding in plain sight, obscured only by our habitual patterns of dividing experience into me in here and world out there. The Upanishads express this beautifully with the phrase, Tat Tvam Asi, thou art that. You are not separate from what you experience. You are that very experiencing itself, temporarily taking the form of a particular human being with a particular perspective. The eye cannot see itself, not because it's absent, but because it is the seeing. In the same way, your true nature cannot be found as an object of consciousness, not because it's absent, but because it is consciousness itself. When sound and listener become one, the world is revealed as your own body in a way that defies ordinary understanding. Not in some supernatural or metaphysical sense, but in the most natural and immediate way imaginable. The birdsong isn't happening out there, it's as much a part of your experience as your own heartbeat. The traffic noise isn't an intrusion into your awareness, it's another aspect of awareness expressing itself. Nothing is other, because there is no fixed center around which to organize experience into self and other. I recall sitting once on a hillside in England, overlooking a valley. Sounds were arising: wind in the grass, distant sheep, an occasional car on a far-off road. Suddenly, without any effort or intention on my part, the sense of being a separate listener vanished completely. There were still sounds, but no one hearing them. Or more accurately, the hearing itself was the reality, not as someone who possessed the hearing as an attribute. And in that moment, I understood why the Zen masters would sometimes respond to profound questions with seemingly nonsensical answers, like the cypress tree in the garden or 3 pounds of flax. They weren't being deliberately obscure, they were pointing to the immediate undivided reality that precedes our mental divisions. The cypress tree isn't a symbol of enlightenment. It is enlightenment, when seen without the filter of separation. This recognition that consciousness is not something you have, but what you are, and that all experiences are temporary patterns within this singular consciousness, is the heart of every authentic spiritual teaching. It's been expressed through countless metaphors and practices across cultures and throughout history. But it's never been a secret or an esoteric doctrine reserved for the few. It's the most obvious fact of existence, hidden only by its absolute obviousness. So these 5 sounds we've explored are not really separate sounds at all, but different facets of a single recognition. That the separate self is a useful convention rather than an absolute reality, and that beneath this convention lies an undivided wholeness that includes all of existence. The sounds are not out there, waiting to be heard by the spiritually advanced. They're the song of your own true nature, playing through the instrument of this particular human life. And that, my friends, is perhaps the most liberating insight of all. Awakening is not an achievement, but a recognition of what has always been true. It's not something you attain through effort, but something you realize has never been absent. Like a wave realizing it has always been water, you discover that you have never for a single moment been separate from the totality of existence. So I invite you not to strive to hear these 5 sounds as if they were exotic treasures to be collected, but to recognize that they are already playing in every moment of your experience. Not because you're spiritually special, but because you're alive. Not because you've achieved something others haven't, but because reality is already completely present, completely whole, and completely available just as it is, just where you are. The question is not whether you can hear these sounds, but whether you can recognize that you've never heard anything else. And in that recognition lies a freedom and peace that no achievement of the separate self, no matter how impressive, could ever provide. The freedom and peace of knowing yourself as the whole concert of existence, playing itself out in endlessly creative variations, including this particular human life that you've been calling me. As our exploration comes to its natural conclusion, I'd like to leave you with a thought that has always brought me both amusement and profound comfort. The spiritual journey is rather like a dog chasing its own tail, running in circles, exhausting itself, never quite capturing what it seeks. Until one day, quite by accident, it realizes a startling truth. The tail is already attached. It was never separate, never something to be attained. And in that recognition, the frantic chasing dissolves into laughter. In the same way, these 5 sounds, the sound of thought without words, the space between heartbeats, nature's hidden rhythms, the echo of others' being, and the cosmic hum of existence are not treasures to be hunted down and captured. They're not achievements to add to your spiritual resume. They're simply different facets of a single recognition that what you are seeking is what is seeking. And so, my friends, I invite you not to treat what I've shared today as a new spiritual project, another thing to accomplish, another mountain to climb. Instead, receive it as an invitation to rest from the exhausting effort of trying to become something other than what you already are. To rest in the recognition that the symphony of existence has never stopped playing, and that you are not the audience but the music itself. Listen not with the ears, but with your entire being. Listen not to achieve something, but to recognize what has never been absent. Listen and discover that you are the sound that the universe makes when it takes the form of a human being for a brief, beautiful moment in cosmic time. And in that listening, may you find what all the great teachings have pointed to, that you are already home. You have always been home, and there is nowhere you need to go, nothing you need to become, and no one you need to be other than exactly who you are, right here, right now, in all your perfect, imperfect humanness. This is the simple truth that the awakened ones have been confirming throughout the ages, not because it's a special achievement, but because it's the most obvious fact of existence, hidden only by its absolute obviousness. So obvious, in fact, that you might just hear it in this very moment, arising as the sound of these words, the beating of your heart, and the simple miracle of being alive at all.